Minister Tharman, welcome.
Thank you.
You've just been elected chairman of the IMF's Policy Steering Committee, the International Monetary and Financial Committee. What are your main goals as chairman?
First, to listen. There's a lot of listening to do. The IMFC has performed a very valuable role in the last few years, but there's a lot of work ahead, and I think we can do our job better. And it means, as chair, that I've got to try to bridge differences, because there are differences to be bridged, which are not merely differences of personality or politics. They're differences that reflect the very different situations that countries find themselves in. But one of the key themes coming out of the IMF's own professional work and coming out of the crisis we've just come through is that it's a deeply interconnected world in ways that surprise us, even for economists. I mean, it's surprising how interconnected it is. And that means that what appear to be different interests of different countries is more apparent than real, because it is in the national interests of everyone, emerging market, developing country, in the most advanced economies. It's in everyone's national interests to collaborate to a greater extent than we've been doing before. And that's where the fund is critical, because you do need a multilateral approach, which involves first being able to come to some consensus on a mutual basis as to what makes sense, what are the gaps we have to close, but also then going back to our capitals and thinking through what we have to do ourselves in order to not just play our role in the bargain, but to do what's in our own interests, because what's in our own interests is increasingly in the global interests.
Now, I'm sure some of these issues came to play today during the IMFC meeting. What were the main takeaways?
Well, I think the main takeaway was first a sense that spillovers are very important, and we all recognize that. I think both advanced and emerging countries that still have strong financial systems and those whose systems are still in a state of disrepair and still have a lot of repair ahead. Everyone realizes spillovers are important, and that is why there's a role for not just traditional bilateral surveillance on the part of the fund, but multilateral surveillance. And that was a very important takeaway. Everyone wanted a stronger IMF and a stronger IMFC, and particularly focused on multilateral surveillance and linking it back to what happens bilaterally, and focused on linking up the financial dimension of surveillance with the macroeconomic dimension of surveillance. That's been a big lesson coming out of the crisis. And the fund is uniquely positioned to do the professional work as well as to have ministerial discussion on multilateral surveillance and trying to make sure it has some traction. In other words, that it's effective. It's not just a discussion, not just about writing good papers, but about getting some traction in terms of policy adjustments.
So do you feel, on that note, that policymakers did make some real progress on tackling these global imbalances that have threatened the recovery?
I think so. On a number of issues that we spent a lot of time on today, I saw convergence, starting from positions which were a little closer to the poles. I saw movement, and I don't think we would have got that movement had we not operated as a collegiate body of sorts. And this applies not just to the emerging markets, by the way, it applies to the advanced economies as well. The G20 has helped create that culture, but it really has to be the IMFC creating a culture of its own going forward that's somewhat more collegial, respecting the very different country circumstances and very different country strategies even sometimes. But there is more to be gained from collaboration and from occupying the middle ground in policy debate. Capital flows is a very good example, where a year ago, I think the positions were quite polarized. The IMF then did path-breaking work on capital flows, illustrating that from a pragmatic point of view, there was a range of strategies which weren't such a bad thing and may in fact work quite well in certain circumstances that involve managing capital flows and not leaving it completely free. It's been a very sensitive debate because there are lots of priors that are being tested, a lot of prior beliefs that are being tested. And there's also a certain amount of anxiety as to whether countries are now going to be constrained from doing what they think is in their national interests. But through good professional work and very candid discussion, I think we are getting movement away from the poles towards the center, the middle ground. We're not there yet, to be frank. We're not there yet. But we're getting a movement towards the center. And the pragmatism that the managing director and the senior management of the IMF has demonstrated has been very helpful.
Do you feel that your own selection as the first IMFC chairman from Asia is a reflection of that sort of new thinking at the IMF, the need to listen to more diverse views?
Well, in part, I suppose it is. In part, it is. I think it's a recognition of a number of things. First, of course, Asia is getting more important. Second, I think Singapore is in the fortunate position of being neither clearly a developing or a developed country. And more importantly, I think is seen as neutral in many of the debates that are important to the IMF. We're very sensitive to the needs of emerging countries because we are part of an emerging region. And we understand them well, and we are sensitive to the complexities of the challenges they face. So we don't take purist positions on the policy challenges they face. At the same time, we are quite well plugged into the developed markets. They are equally important for our future. And we are plugged in not just in terms of trade and investment links and so on, but we're also plugged into their institutions and the thinking. So our neutrality, I think, is helpful at this stage of the game for the IMF because we are able to listen and intervene without anyone thinking we're doing it for our own interests. And it also helps to be a rather small country.
Speaking of emerging markets, do you think that the recent governance reform at the IMF has gone far enough in terms of giving more say to this group of markets, also to low-income countries?
Well, I think this has to be evolutionary. It's a significant move forward. I'm a little bit of a realist in these matters. I don't think you can redesign the world immediately or even in a few years. But what's more important is to have momentum and to be moving in the right direction. And I think we've had significant momentum just in the last year, and we're moving in the right direction, but we haven't reached the final destination. No one knows what that final destination will be like because the world is changing rapidly. So it's best to keep things a little open-ended, a little fluid, and not think that, not argue too hard about final solutions.
Minister Tharman, thank you very much.
Thank you.